Well, through 2 weeks, Oregon State has certainly played and looked like a Pac-12 contender, but what do we really know about the Beavs right now?
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I am your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and soon to be mostly team-free, but until then, very loaded and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 or more infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. You know, an antibiotic for the infection of not having enough Beaver coverage specifically? Carter Bahns, a great antibiotic for that. Beaverblitz.com, the 24/7 sports national writing desk as well. Let's dive right into it, Carter, because we've seen Oregon State dominate through the first couple of weeks. 42-17 against San Jose State, who, kind of hung around with USC for about a half and change, and Oregon State only really let them hang around for about a quarter. And it never felt like it was that close. And then they play UC Davis last week, who I'm actually going to see on the radio call for Southern Utah in Sacramento, and they beat them 55-7. And that's, an FCS program, but a good one. So what can we actually say about Oregon State right now?
Not a ton, but I think we know that the defense is still pretty solid. Just when you do the whole transitive property thing between San Jose State playing against USC and Oregon State, I mean, the Spartans looked, I don't want to say inept against Oregon State, but they weren't really able to get anything going with any sort of consistency. And they did at times against USC. So I think that's enough for us to say Oregon State's defense is still pretty legit. And then offensively, we know Damian Martinez is the real deal. We knew that coming into the season, but he's done nothing but produce 100-yard games so far this year. And I think DJ Uiagalelei is living up to the early hype. He didn't throw a whole lot against UC Davis. He didn't have to. But against San Jose State, drawing a lot of national praise from really from all sectors of college football. And I think Clemson fans were probably wishing that maybe they had held on to him after that week 1 loss. So, I mean, everything that you wanted to see from Oregon State in the early season really is exactly what you've gotten.
I think with DJU, the contrast of Clemson losing to Duke in football, not basketball, in football, is kind of what exacerbated the DJU, kind of hype. Like, it was just kind of an easy narrative to paint. I'm not harping on DJU here. I do think that against the Pac-12, it's going to be a much higher caliber of defense. We know San Jose State is not a defensive juggernaut. UC Davis, of course, competing at the FCS level. And I think so far, we'll get to DJ a bit more later, he's been pretty darn solid at this point in time. But looking at this week's matchup with San Diego State, a team that got beat badly by UCLA a week ago, 35-10 on their home field. The game is in Corvallis. I don't think Oregon State has any problem here whatsoever. I think the Aztecs are just kind of an okay to maybe above average Mountain West team, but they struggled in the trenches against UCLA. I thought they might. I think they will again against this Oregon State defense. Can we learn more about the Beavs this week, or is it just all going to come down to, hey, what do you bring to the table, whether it's DJU or the rest of the team, once Pac-12 play begins?
No, I don't think you would learn anything positively from this game. I mean, if Oregon State slips up, maybe you'll learn something about their ability to take care of business against inferior competition. But like you said, I don't think they have any trouble here. This is not the same caliber of San Diego State team and program that we have seen in years past. This is somewhat of a down year for this program that generally gives Pac-12 teams a lot of trouble. When you think of Mountain West teams that have performed well against the conference, San Diego State's right up there with the top, with the Boise States, with the Fresno States. So I just don't see the Aztecs putting that much of a scare into the Beavers, considering the way Oregon State handled San Jose State to start the year. And really, I don't take anything away from the UC Davis game other than Oregon State did exactly what you expect. But there's no reason for me to believe that Oregon State will slip up here.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. And so far, I think Oregon State has kind of looked the way that we expected them to, not just from a result standpoint, but from a stylistic standpoint as well. It's like, okay, they want to run the football a lot, like they did against UC Davis last week. They were, I think, pushing towards 300 yards on the ground. They didn't even throw for 200, and they put up 55 points. They only allow 7. San Jose State, DJU is, in that sort of zone in week 1 where I think he is going to be at his best for Oregon State, and why I thought he could be a much better version of what he was at Clemson, because he's just not asked to do as much. Like, Cade Klumdick is a really talented quarterback as well, and guess what? He's struggling in that same Dabo Swinney Clemson offense right now. Even with Garrett Riley as his offensive coordinator, they put up just 7 points in week 1, and they run everything through the quarterback because that's where they found success. But why I like the DJU merger with the Beavs, a traditional merger, not the conference realignment type. I think that he just has to go for, that San Jose State game, I think, is the perfect script. And look, it's only the San Jose State, were they the Spartans? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's not the best team you're going to play all year, but they were on the road. It was week 1. San Jose State had already played a game, and they looked comfortable, in control. They knew what their identity was, and DJU went for 240 and 5 total touchdowns, 3 of which were through the air. That is the script for Oregon State to be a Pac-12 contender this year.
And he did it from the first drive of the game too. I mean, it's not like he needed a half to warm up. I mean, he had a great first half too. To your point about, him fitting an Oregon State system a lot better than Clemson's, one of my takeaways from Oregon State's win against UC Davis was the way they used the 2 quarterbacks, because Aiden Childs did play the entire second half and was very, very impressive in that half hour of football. When DJ's on the field for Oregon State, he is like strictly operating in the pocket. The only time they're designing runs for him is in those short yardage situations where a guy of his stature is basically just the second coming of Jack Coletto, basically, when he's running the quarterback sneak. At Clemson, he was running a whole lot of RPOs and read options. Oregon State just hasn't used him in any of those situations at all. And that's part of what drew him to Oregon State, was the pro style system. The fact that, they put their quarterbacks in positions to be successful, and always have under Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren. Aiden Childs comes into the game, and it's a completely different game plan. They're running read options. He's, running RPOs every other play. They're running these short routes for him to dump it off to speedy receivers. I just think Oregon State's coaching staff is really adept at putting their quarterbacks in these perfect scenarios where, they tailor their playbook and their play calling and their entire scheme around the quarterback's strengths. That has been entirely apparent through 2 weeks with DJ, but I just thought it was interesting to see that firsthand, kind of the difference between how they could use 2 guys on their own roster.
Yeah, I like what they've done so far, and DJU clearly just needed a change of scenery, and we'll see how successful he's able to be once conference play begins, and that Washington State game next week certainly looms large. He adapted to Oregon State like you can adapt to any situation with Jase Medical. The Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of our board-certified physicians. Get ongoing care from their physicians on any treatment-related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. You don't want to be caught unprepared. Everyone has to be empowered to take care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jase handles everything from online streamlined evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Reliance on supply chain and China, and you've got shortages and everything going on in the world right now. You want to be able to be prepared, and that's what Jace Medical can help you do. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Second segment. Always a lifesaver here on Locked On Pac-12. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review wherever you're listening or watching right now. Carter Bahns, not Pains. He is not a pain. He is definitely not. That was not a jab just because I'm an Oregon fan. Though I might want to stash that one in my back pocket for the future. Carter Bahns, the 24/7 Sports National Writing Desk and Beaver Blitz, joining me here. So one thing that I wondered about coming into this year was Oregon State and their number one receiver situation. Trayshawn Harrison not on this year's roster. He was the number one target and kind of that big-bodied receiver for the Beavs last year. That was kind of the only question I had about them offensively. I trust them to develop tight ends. I know they have good running backs. I think they have two great slot kind of gadget speed guys. But what's kind of been the look for you offensively, complementing DJU with a receiving presence on the outside?
Well, I think it starts with the two guys that you're mentioning there, Silas Bolden and Anthony Gould, who are going to be far and away the leading receivers on this team. I mean, it's the offense runs through those two guys. Anthony Gould missed the UC Davis game due to an injury. I don't think it's going to be very long term, though. We might see him against San Diego State. Maybe they'll hold him out, and we see him in the conference opener. But getting Gould back into the mix, I mean, the big playability with DJ's arm strength, it's pretty intriguing. Silas Bolden brings that too. I mean, the special teams ability too with both of those guys. I mean, Silas Bolden returned a punt return for a touchdown last week. That's normally Anthony Gould's role, because Bolden normally does the kickoffs and Gould is the one who always returns the punts for touchdowns.
That's what you call an embarrassment of riches in the return game.
Exactly. You've got literally two all-conference guys and an all-American in your special teams room. Oh, and they just happen to be your primary pass catchers. Yeah, so getting them the ball is probably a priority. Those are the two guys. Oregon State has a lot of younger slash former walk-on guys in the wide receiver room who are starting to step up. Reham Manyagi actually caught a touchdown last week, I believe, and I mean that's a guy who joined the program in like 2018 as a walk-on, I believe, and is just now getting his first action at receiver. And I mean, he's producing. Josiah Irish has been in the program for about as long, traditionally a special teams guy who is expanding his role. So it's kind of this committee of guys who maybe were overlooked in the past or, who needed a few years to develop that are finally starting to blossom. And it's not like they're just throwing them into the mix and seeing what sticks. I mean, these are guys who earned those roles in camp too. And then, excuse me, battling COVID here. So
remote podcast work is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Ready for any occasion.
And then you mentioned the tight ends. I mean, Oregon State's offense is very tight end reliant. And that's going to be the case again this year. Riley Sharp actually moved over from outside linebacker, where he was for, like 4 years, caught a touchdown last week at tight end. So he's adding to the depth there. You've got Jack Velling returning, Jake Overman, and then Jermaine Terry from Cal, who transferred in, who was a former 4-star recruit. So, the wealth of riches, as you mentioned, in the wide receiver room, I think, or at the top of the wide receiver room with regard to their special teams ability. I think that translates as well to the tight end group. So you have a variety of targets and what they provide skill set wise around DJ.
Well, the offense has certainly looked good so far, and we'll see what they do against San Diego State. I expect at home in the newly renovated Reser Stadium, which looks great, by the way. I think they'll be all right against the Aztecs. Let's talk about the Bees kind of big picture here and how they've looked compared to the other Pac-12 contenders. Because I thought coming into the year, and I still believe this, by the way, that there are 5 teams really that can win the Pac-12 title. Now, I understand some people might want to put UCLA into that mix. I think Dante Moore is really talented. I thought he should have been the starter from the jump this season. I think that he has got a lot of potential. He's still a true freshman and is going to make some true freshman mistakes, but he's certainly further along than, say, a Jaden Rashada down at Arizona State or Sam Jackson at Cal, who's basically starting for the first time. But I think that UCLA is a good team. I don't think they're a conference championship team in this league. I think your contenders are Oregon State, Oregon, Washington, Utah, and USC. Everyone's kind of delivered a mixed bag of sorts. I mean, USC and Oregon State, they haven't played anybody. Oregon and Utah escaped on the road. I think Utah probably more impressive there because they did it with a backup quarterback, though I think Oregon was playing a better team overall in Texas Tech. I don't know if I have a strong sense right now of like where the hierarchy kind of is for Oregon State. Do you think we just need to get into conference play before we can definitively say, okay, it's, USC and Washington up here, and Oregon and Utah and Oregon State are all in the next tier, and Oregon State's maybe at the top of that? What do you think?
I agree with you. And I mean, I'd throw Washington into that mix of we don't really know what to make of them because they haven't played anyone either. I mean, Boise State is, I guess, their best opponent, but they lost to UCF at home. So how good are the Broncos really this year too? And then they beat Tulsa in a blowout. So, I mean, Michael Penix is doing Michael Penix things, but like he's doing it against like mid-tier group of 5 competition. So I do want to see a little bit more of Washington in conference play, but I mean, I don't have any concerns about them. I don't have any concerns about any of these teams. It's just that, obviously they haven't played similarly talented opponents yet. And that's where you'll really learn the nitty gritty of these teams. It's the can DJ Uiagalelei, can his accuracy really be improved when he's playing against, Pac-12 secondaries, and it's the
when he plays against Washington State next week, frankly. Yeah. Like that's going to be a legitimate test. That defense is nasty.
Yeah, like if it's the fourth quarter and Oregon State needs a touchdown to force overtime or to win, like can he come through, or is he going to overthrow receivers by 5 yards like he did at Clemson? I think we'll learn a lot more about that when the pressure's on than when he's playing a San Jose State or a San Diego State and the Beavers have a 3-touchdown cushion and it doesn't really matter what he does. But I think we will see things sort out pretty early in conference play. I think you'll start to see the top half separate from the bottom half. The bottom half of the Pac-12 has looked really good. I mean, we'll both.
It's not really a bottom half. I mean, like saying that there is a bottom half to this conference would imply teams other than Arizona State and Stanford look bad at this point, which nobody does really.
Right. I mean, that's the point that I'm trying to get at here is like, where is the separation when the separation comes? Like, where do we draw the line? Like, is UCLA part of that mix? Are they not? Is Washington State actually for real? Or are they just, kind of one of those pseudo top 25 teams? I am really curious to see how the conference shakes out because I think this is the deepest it's been in, maybe forever.
It's 10 deep.
But I think that could also hurt the teams at the top. We talk about the Pac-12 beating itself up year after year, the inability for a team to run the table, go undefeated in conference play. Yeah, there's not going to be a 12-0 Pac-12 champion this year. There might not even be an 11-1 Pac-12 champion this year.
Oh, I don't think there's going to be a one-loss conference champion. I think we're missing the playoff once again as a league because it is so gosh darn deep. I mean, our most beloved American traditions go 4th of July, Christmas, and the Pac-12 cannibalizing itself out of the playoff. Like these things just take place annually, and we celebrate them. Or some people maybe don't enjoy them as much. I don't know how you don't enjoy the 4th of July and Christmas, but some people might not enjoy the Pac-12 not making the playoff year after year ever since Washington last made it in 2016. I've long held that opinion, and I'm like tripling down on it, Carter, because when I say the league goes 10 deep, I mean there are 10 teams that I think can finish over 500 in 2023, and I think it'll be a rough year for ASU and for Stanford as well. I thought that coming in. but I thought Colorado was going to need a year. Clearly they don't. They're ready to be a team that gets over 500. And there's just such a gauntlet. Like right now, if you look at every Pac-12 team's schedule, it features like 5 or 6 ranked opponents. It's like, no one's getting through that undefeated, first of all. Who's getting through it with only one loss? And you have to factor in the conference championship game as well, in which you're going to almost assuredly be playing one of these top 5 teams that we talked about coming into the year: Oregon State, Oregon, USC, Utah, and Washington. So, and on the Washington thing real quick, I know they haven't played anybody yet this year, but everything looks the exact same to me as it did a season ago. I think that's the team that I honestly have the fewest questions about. Like as a football team, top to bottom, I think they look basically the same. I haven't seen it. Like the only question I had coming into this year about them was, well, what's the interior O-line? They're replacing a few guys in there. Is that going to be the same? I mean, so far so good. Penix has thrown for, I think, over 400 yards in each of the first 2 games. That's what he did, early in the 2022 season as well. So I don't have as many questions there. The other teams, I think you can raise more questions about, but I don't put them in the doubt category because I think the teams are really, really good. Something else that I don't doubt, Carter, is everyone's ability to find a good deal on GameTime, because that's the best way to buy tickets to your favorite event, which shouldn't be stressful, but sometimes is. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. You can go in, click on your seats, and see a picture of where the seats actually are, what they look like, and decide whether or not you want to go there or somewhere else, buy something more expensive, get something a little bit more affordable, whatever you want, they've got it. They also have a lowest price guarantee, so if you find a ticket in the same spot that's cheaper elsewhere, they'll refund you for 110% of the difference. Get images of your seat, get the best deals, get flash deals as well that pop up, and you can get tickets the day of the event. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, so I did want your thoughts on my Washington theory, which is that they, to me, are the team that I have the fewest questions about, because USC, I don't really know if that defense is better. They played better against Nevada and Stanford. I think that's an encouraging thing, but I need to see that against legitimate Power 5 competition. Utah, if Cam Rising doesn't play, if Cam Rising does play, how healthy is he? What does he look like? When does he play? Which certainly not this week against Weber State, maybe for a couple series, but next week against UCLA, I think will be the first test really for him. Oregon State, DJ U has looked better so far against an average Mountain West team and an FCS opponent. Oregon's defense had moments against Texas Tech where it was good. They also, as a team, committed 14 penalties, and a lot of them came on the defensive side of the ball. So I think everyone kind of has a major question there, but Washington right now, to me, looks like the most rinse and repeat team from a season ago through 2 games, and they've got the same quarterback, same receivers, and the same offensive coordinator, and the same tight ends.
I'm with you there, and I think it's mostly because of what you just mentioned there. They return basically everybody from last year's team, everybody that was
everybody that mattered,
a key contributor, basically.
Aside from Jackson Kirkland along the offensive line, I can't think of a major player that they lost.
But it's still a good offensive line. So
yes,
I mean, the thing with them, I think, is the depth piece. If they're not 100% healthy, I think that's, and I mean, this goes for every team, but I think particularly with Washington, there may be a few more depth concerns there than at some of the other schools. And so, like what happens if you lose one of your top 2 receivers? What happens if Penix has to miss a game? Cause I mean, he has been highly injury prone throughout his career. I think that is where Washington gets really vulnerable. Whereas the other teams, it's more like, we have deficiencies that we can see with our own 2 eyes right now in these starting lineups. Another thing with Oregon too, is the Dan Lanning effect. Like, I think he single-handedly cost them the Oregon State and Washington games last year with his decision-making. Like, has he learned from his errors? Is his game management better this year? I'd throw that in. The
problem is the defense wouldn't make any stops. Like, I see what you're saying, and I think that's a fair question overall, particularly with Washington. Oregon went for it on their own side of the field, like the 30-yard line with minute 34 to go, and then running back slips, and the backup quarterback was in the game. They couldn't get Bo back on the field to, present the quarterback run threat or do a quarterback sneak or anything. If we punt that ball, people know, I'm sure that by now that I'm an Oregon fan. If Oregon punts that ball back to Washington, they're moving right down the field. Like there were no stops to be had in that game. So that was certainly the thinking there. The Oregon State game, they weren't making stops. Would they have been able to? Maybe, perhaps. But I think more than the decision making, I think the question for Lanning right now in the Ducks is that defense just going to be improved schematically and results wise? There were moments against Texas Tech where I felt, okay, this is a much better defense. There were moments where I was like, same kind of issues as last year, but they got more pressure, they created turnovers, and they held up much better in the trenches than they did a season ago. So I think that's, again, that's still what I'm kind of wondering is like, okay, they forced 4 turnovers. That's really, really good. They had 4 sacks. That's really good. They didn't have those things as often last year, and they were playing, a Power 5 opponent on the road in Texas Tech, but they had 14 penalties for 124 yards. You do that against Washington or USC, and you give first downs the way they did in the secondary, yeah, that's going to be a 400-plus yard passing day for Caleb Williams or Michael Penix.
Yeah, the defense is obviously my number one concern with Oregon. The Lanning thing was just kind of a small thing that I guess I have a few questions about just based off of, some of his decisions last year. But everything, like you said, it does start with the defense. Like if the defense plays up to its star caliber, last year, they're not in a situation where they have to make those play calls to go for it on 4th down. So, you're right in that vein. One more thing before we move on to Oregon State, Washington State. We talked about the Pac-12 eating itself up at the top. Maybe this is the year that a 2-loss Pac-12 champion makes it to the college football playoff.
No way.
I with the SEC down like it is, the SEC is a one bid league this year. I think people have recognized, and national analysts are talking about how good the Pac-12 is, and people recognize it. And you have big brands that are really good again, and USC, Oregon, and Washington. Like, maybe the resumes are just so good that a 2-loss Pac-12 champion gets in. It depends. If your losses, if you're USC and your losses are to Oregon and Washington, who are both probably 9 or 10 win teams, and you win the Pac-12 championship, like you might get in over an SEC team this year.
It would depend. Depends on schedules, depends on who's got wins where. Here's where I come at it. There are still 3 teams in the SEC that would get in as a 1-loss 11-1 or conference champion, and that's LSU, Bama, Georgia. If any of those are 1-loss, the Pac-12, you're right, is getting more national respect, which is great because they deserve it. But there's still a lot of SEC bias in the world, and I think the Pac-12 is making a dent at that right now, but they haven't made enough dents over the years to where the committee would say, a 2-loss team is going to get in from the Pac-12. Like I would be surprised if that happens, and you just gave me a discussion point for sometime next week on the show. So thank you for that. But I want to talk about this Washington State game before we get out of here for today, because this is suddenly looking. First of all, it's going to be a top 25 matchup. Oregon State's going to roll over San Diego State. Wazoo is playing, I think, Idaho this week. Like they're both going to be 3-0. They're both going to be ranked in the top 25. It's in Pullman, which is going to be on fire because that's what Pullman does. What is your early feeling right now on how the Beavs can match up against the Cougs, a place where historically they have struggled, and against a team that they've historically struggled with until this past season?
It feels like this is one of those games the last couple of years before, the whole coaching shakeup, where it's like first to 55 wins. It's back and forth, just haymaker after haymaker. And, Oregon State's trying to make it to a bowl, and Washington State's trying to compete for a Pac-12 championship. Like, this feels like one of those games from like the 2019, era of these programs. there's a lot on the line. It's just unfortunate that I think that these teams have to play each other this year, because I just think there's so much mutual respect for each other right now. I mean, shoot, I was at Research Stadium. They announced the Washington State-Wisconsin score, and the crowd erupts like Oregon State scored a touchdown. It's unfortunate that there has to be a loser between these two teams. Another element of that is this game's 4 p.m. on Fox. Like, there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on this, and it's on one of the networks that, Oregon State and Washington State fans say is, the reason behind Oregon State and Washington State getting.
They're not the only ones saying that. You can put me in that boat. Fox has been a bad actor in this entire situation. Yeah.
So, I saw a Twitter poll. If Fox sends its Big Noon Sunday crew and it's faux college game day set to Pullman, do Washington State fans boycott? Do they show up and boo the entire show? Like,
they should. I think
that's kind of a fun element to this thing. Like, Oregon State and Washington State have a major bone to pick with the national network that is broadcasting this game, and it's probably going to be a great game. And people are going to be saying, how does this network not want more of this?
I agree, and this is wishful thinking. Maybe they would see the game play out and go, "Gosh Almighty, we can't leave these schools behind." But I don't think one football game can change, the mountains that have already been moved on the realignment front. And unfortunately, it looks like a matchup of future Mountain West teams or new Pac, formerly Mountain West teams, and I think that just. As I've talked about many times here on the show, I think that all absolutely stinks. But, I mean, the stakes are going to be so high because you've got Wisconsin having gone in there and lost already. So Washington State's in the top 25. Oregon State will be 3-0 feeling good. Oregon State's trying to contend for a Pac-12 title. If Washington State wins that game, I think we'd have to talk about them, at least in the conversation, of putting themselves in the mix for a Pac-12 title game appearance. I don't necessarily think they could get there, but you would have to discuss it because the Cougs, like the Beavs, have one of the more favorable schedules in the league. So I think it's just such a massive tone setter for both as conference play begins. And if I'll end on this kind of a negative note, but week 3 in college football is a dud, and the Pac-12 is no different. There are not that many good games. We had 7 Power 5 non-conference matchups last week in the Pac-12. We have 1 this week, and the Huskies are a 16-point favorite in East Lansing against Michigan State. So it's not quite as vaunted of a lineup of games this week, but then get excited about next week because you have UCLA at Utah, top 25 matchup, Oregon State at Washington State, top 25 matchup, Colorado at Oregon, top 25 matchup, and then don't sleep on games like Arizona at Stanford, which I think could be fun just because it's on the road. Maybe Stanford gives Arizona a little bit of a scare. I think they'll be fine. But Cal at Washington, we've seen crazy things happen in that matchup before, and I think Cal's a pretty solid football team. So, this week, just about everybody's going to be enjoying a win. I have no idea what I'm going to do for my Pac-12 Prime picks on tomorrow's show because I hate the lines I got to pick this week, but I'm going to stick to my word, pick 5 games, grin and bear it, and get it done. Any closing advice on that, Carter? Any lines that you like this week? They're all over the place.
No, I was in charge of the week 3 opening lines for 24/7 Sports earlier this week, and I said, man, there are very few intriguing matchups this week. It's like the only games between brands that I even really care about this week are like 20-point lines. So I've got nothing for you there. One more note though, Fox is a tier 1 media rights partner with the Mountain West. So any sort of protest from Washington State, Oregon State fans, not going to go very far because Fox is going to say, well, guess what? We're going to broadcast your games anyway. So there goes that whole thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's end on that particular note, not dive into that nonsense. Carter Bahns, 24/7 Sports and BeaverBlitz.com. Thanks as always, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate all of you listening. Thank you so much for doing that. I'll see you next time. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.